In this lesson, we're going to talk about winning lotteries and racing on stilts. While we will discuss those fascinating topics, we're really going to talk about strategies for answering the questions on the ACT reading test. First and foremost, read the question. I know it sounds obvious and simplistic, but many students fail to read the questions carefully. You must correctly interpret the question and answer it specifically. Remember that there's a thesis to each passage, and you will see several questions about this main point interspersed throughout the questions. Make sure that the answers you choose don't contradict each other and that they form a cohesive picture. Some of the prose fiction passages will have a narrative shift. Look for a change in time. For example, the author as a child and as an adult. Or look for a change in the narrator as the passage may be told from different perspectives. For instance, you might see The Lottery Ticket, a short story by Anton Chekhov, as a prose fiction passage. The story is told from the perspective of Ivan, a middle-class man dreaming about what he would do if his wife Masha was in possession of a winning lottery ticket. Near the end of the story, the narrative shifts from Ivan's perspective to a brief glimpse into Masha's thoughts. Let's look at a question regarding this passage that addresses the narrative shift. The question states, Masha mirrors her husband's feelings by showing that she A. has daydreams of her own, B. has difficulty with the weather too, C. wants them to stay at home, or D. is also sensitive to criticism. In order to see how Masha mirrors her husband's feelings, we have to understand what Ivan's feelings are. Ivan states why it will be a new life, it will be a transformation. He goes on to catalog all of ways he'd spend the money from furniture to travel to paying off debt. If we return to Masha's perspective, we see that she has her own daydreams, her own plans, and her own reflections, which is reflected in answer choice A. In this case, Chekhov shifted the narrative in order to show what Masha is thinking. With the prose fiction passages, be aware of changes in point of view and consider what the author is trying to convey by using this technique. When you're reading the nonfiction passages, look for a change in the point of view with respect to a concept or the reconciliation of competing theories. Be mindful of whose voice the question is seeking. The question could be asking about the author's opinion or that of someone else in the passage. So make sure that you are focused on the right person. The ACT anticipates these mistakes and will try to trip you up. So if you focus on the wrong person, you will likely find an acceptable answer, but you won't have answered the question correctly. If you've underlined and circled details while reading and mapping the passages, then you'll be able to locate the answers more quickly. For instance, in another question about the story The Lottery Ticket, the question is asking what Ivan imagines his wife will do, not what his wife imagines she'll do. In reading the passage carefully, we discover that Ivan thinks his wife will take all the money and leave him nothing, or choice B. Another thing to keep in mind is that some questions on the ACT provide line references. Got a hot pro tip coming at you. While the word or phrase referenced will be in that line, the answer is actually going to be a few lines before or after the line reference. So read around that area to find the answer. Let me bring up an example so you see what I mean. The following passage describes an event that proves truth can be stranger than fiction. Ever heard of a stilt race? Well then, read on. The question asks, when the race is described as grueling, line 1, the author means it was A. lengthy, B. extremely demanding, C. comical, or D. very unusual. The first sentence states, one of the most unusual and grueling races ever to be run was the great stilt race that took place in southwestern France in the late 1800s. That doesn't give you any context for the meaning of the word grueling. However, if you read the rest of the paragraph, you'll see that they were asked to walk almost 300 miles. Choice A says lengthy, which is correct, but not quite the right definition for the word grueling. Choice B is extremely demanding, which seems to fit in this context since most would consider a 300-mile walk on or off stilts to be exceptionally difficult. Choice C is comical. Well, that's not right unless you have a very sick sense of humor. Let's cross that off. Choice D is very unusual. Okay, it was probably unusual, but we know that's not a definition for grueling. As you can see, we had to read past line 1 to see that choice B was the correct answer. Here's another pro tip for you. You should think carefully about answer choices that use extreme words like never and always. They are usually incorrect. It's also important to carefully inspect answer choices that contain adjectives and adverbs because those change the meaning and can sometimes make an answer choice incorrect. Okay, let's go back to our stilt race example and see how this plays out. The question asks, the main point of this passage is to A. Illustrate the difficulties of walking long distances on stilts. B. Recount the story of a strange race with stilts that took place in the late 1800s. C. Deliberate why the winner was so much faster than the other competitors. Or D. Illustrate how many newspapers try to increase their readership by sponsoring events. Choice C contains the adverbial clause so much faster, and choice D has the adjective many. While the text might touch on the winner and why he was so much faster, and also discuss the newspaper that was trying to increase its readership, the adverbs and adjectives in these choices make them suspect. We can also eliminate choice A, because the passage has a greater purpose than illustrating the difficulties of walking long distances on stilts. The correct answer is choice B. Recount the story of a strange race that took place in the late 1800s, which is a more global look at the passage than the other answers. If you're pressed for time, answer the shorter questions about the passage first, such as questions on word choice or ones with line references. Save longer questions about the main idea, purpose, and function for last. And just so you know, the ACT has recently introduced the double passage, which could be any one of the 4 reading passages. But don't worry, it's actually easier to deal with because the questions are grouped. I recommend you start by reading the first passage and answering the relevant questions. Those questions will be clearly marked. Then read the second passage and answer the relevant questions. Those will also be grouped. Now that you've got a little perspective on each passage individually, answer the 3 or 4 questions that pertain to both. So whether you're reading about Russian lottery tickets or a French stilt race, you've got your winning ticket for success on the big race ahead, the ACT. Now that you've learned about reading questions, make sure you apply your new knowledge by answering some practice questions.